Oh, sorry. Yeah. Let me get yours. Sorry. No. I have yours. Oh, okay. Yeah, I have yours.
Right, with a bit of luck, it should come up on your screen. Can you see the document?
We could just cover it a bit.
You can see it now?
Yes, can you make it bigger?
Yeah, I can't make it much bigger because the fact that there's the picture as well, you know?
Okay.
That's probably the biggest I can get it. But you don't need to follow it so much on the screen. It's really a case of just, you know, us trying to do it together. Okay, well, let's make a start. So, you know, welcome to the final part of Module 1, and I'm sorry there was a delay in between. That was due to unforeseen circumstances. But you remember, the case we were looking at was the clothing importer.
Yes.
And if you look at the first page of that case, just to refresh our memories, that what we were trying to do as financial planners was to analyse the business performance. And the way we did that, remember, we worked a whole bunch of ratios, and I hope you've still got your workings on those. We'll refresh our memories on those in a few minutes. And then we were doing all this as our homework in preparation for meeting the clothing director, who has told us the business is expanding, with last year's sales at $1.3 million. And why he wants to meet you is to talk about future investment plans. So the case study revolves around, you know, how would you respond to this client and include an analysis of the business performance. So we'll talk a little bit later about how we're going to formulate our response, but before we can do that, we've just got to do a bit more homework, you know, actually on the case, because revisiting the ratios, can you find your workings on the ratios on the case study? See if you can find those. If you can find yours and the person next to you can't find theirs, perhaps you can share. We used the summary ratio sheet, remember?
Yes.
And just kind of recapping on this, if we looked at sales, you know, bearing in mind his comment about sales increasing to $1.3 million, well, that's very true if you look at the summaries of the income statements. And we actually calculated, if you remember, what the sales growth was. Year one we couldn't do it because we didn't have any figures before year one. But in the growth between 1 and 2 was approximately 17%, and then the growth in the final year figures that we had was about 24%. So that was really good, an impressive sales growth position. But unfortunately, when we started to work the other ratios, they didn't paint, you know, such a nice picture, did they?
Right.
Can you see the trends on the other figures there?
Yeah. Yes.
Good.
They were
Everybody was decreasing. Everything.
So the gross profit margin, for example, which is very important because you need to make a reasonable gross profit, because following the gross profit there'll be a huge bunch of costs in any type of business, you know, before you get down to the net profit. So gross profit was slipping 10, 9, down to 7, so that's quite a worrying trend. And we discussed how best you can try and bring this into discussion, you know, without coming over too accountancy focused. You could use the expression, well, for every $100 of sales, in the first year there you were making $10 contribution, you know, towards your other costs in the business, and that's quite straightforward to comprehend. And then the second year, it wasn't quite so good at $9, but you realise that in the third year, Mr. Clothing, it's dropped to $7. So now you've only got $7 out of every $100 of sales, you know, which will be hard to achieve in this type of business, this clothing business, towards your overhead costs. And then we moved a bit further down our ratio analysis, and when we got to the net profit line, you know, which is the most important line, the bottom line position there, the figures I have in front of me here, and I've just checked them with you, I had 1.9%,
Yeah.
1.5, and then 0.15. Did you have those figures?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. Now, the bad news for clothing then is, in that final year, for every $100 of sales, he's not even making $1 net profit, is he? He's only making 15 cents out of $100 sales. So when people talk now about break-even points in business, and you know, you read books about break-even analysis, or you might do it at school or college or university or whatever, break-even is a very interesting tool to look at in business, but you can see in year 3 there, you know, he's almost at a break-even point, isn't he? So what that means is if his costs get any higher, you know, he's going to slip into a loss-making situation. So that's the profitability side of the business. Then we looked at the various liquidity ratios, and I did tell you have to be careful with those because they're slightly old-fashioned ratios, and you've got to get behind those ratios to see, you know, what's the constituent parts. So for example, if we looked at the current ratio on clothing imports, you'd probably think on a snapshot basis, oh well, that current ratio looks okay, so that's the amount of current assets over the current liabilities. But of course what you need to do is get behind the figures and see what the liabilities actually are, you know, from within the balance sheet. And same with the assets, we need to get behind the current assets and see what the dominant figures are. So if we just sidetrack for a moment, and you go back to the balance sheet, which was on page 12, on my sheet here, it's probably 12 on yours, I hope. You can see what I'm getting at. So if we look, for example, at the current assets, you can see the current assets, total current assets, $285,000, so that's a large amount. What's it made up of? Well, debtors, that's people who owe money to the business, that's receivables, and stock, the inventory. And of course this type of business will revolve very heavily around the stock because it's the stock of clothes, isn't it? Right. So you can see the figures there, and then the next year, current assets increased quite significantly, up to 360,000, and then in year 3 they go up to a staggering figure, almost approaching $500,000. And then we need to look again, you know, behind the figures. What's this made up of? Well, $230,000 owed to the business by way of debtors, so that's a very large amount, which we'd want to talk to the client about. And then look at the stock, you know, over $250,000 of stock. So that's the type of approach I mean when I say, you know, like diving in and getting behind the figures to make more sense of some of these ratios. Any questions on that bit so far? You're okay so far?
Not yet, no sir.
Okay, so then if we look at the next box on your ratio sheet, and I did stress the importance of these 3 ratios, so if you haven't highlighted them, I'd highlight them: trade debtors or receivables, if you prefer the term, stock levels or inventory, and trade creditors or payables. Those are 3 key ratios for any business person, and 3 key ratios for us as potential financial planners. You know, this is an area generally where you'll find a lot of scope for discussion with the clients. You know, and if you're not too sure where to start the discussion. As I mentioned before, a good place to start is talk about sales, because most business people know what their sales position is. And then, if you're not too sure where to go from there, you could look at these, because these three have a significant impact on the cash flow of every type of business. So that's how quickly the debtors or receivables have been collecting in, how quickly is the stock or inventory being turned over, and then how quickly or slowly are they paying their creditors. Again, big impact on the cash flow. So I would bracket those three together, if you wish, and just put to the side a little note for yourself, big impact on cash flow. So big impact on the cash flow. And then the bottom section is all to do with the maths, for us, primarily as financial analysts. We didn't do the return on equity, we tend to do that on larger companies. But interest cover, very important, and we looked at that calculation. I'm not sure if you can remember that, but it was the profit before interest and tax divided by the interest, or alternatively, if you prefer the US definition, EBIT, earnings before interest and tax divided by interest. And this comes from the income statement. So if we go back to the income statement on page 13, and this is a very powerful ratio for us, because we're looking to see how much coverage there is of the interest charge on the amount of debt that the business is carrying. So, very powerful ratio for us. So year one, 33,000 at PBIT or EBIT, divided by the interest of 8,000, gives coverage of over 4 times. So that's quite a good coverage figure, I think you'd agree. And the second year is quite significant as well. Without doing the maths, again, it's going to be about 4 times covered. But then, when we look at year 3, there's a problem in year 3. Now, I didn't make a note of the year 3 figure, but I can see straight away it's gone down significantly. We've only got $13,000 to cover 11, so it's still covered, but the ratio's got much tighter. It'll be 1 point something. What did you get for that?
1.2.
Yeah,
1.2, thank you, I'll make a note of that. So dropping to 1.2 to 1. So getting tight on the interest coverage, and then no tax being paid on that small profit figure, and leaving a small profit of $2,000. So let's go back to the ratio sheet. So two of the financial ratios, the leverage, which is a ratio that's not very often used, but it is used in some institutions. Leverage, we're using here the international definition, is all of the liabilities divided by the net worth of the business. So this is all the liabilities, so all the current liabilities plus the long-term liabilities, add all those together, and then divided by the net worth will give us the leverage. Now the difference between leverage and the gearing, or debt gearing as we've got there, is when we look at gearing, what we're looking at is the interest-bearing debt. So that's the difference between the two. So leverage is all of the liabilities, but then when we look at the gearing, what we're doing then is we're going through all the liabilities, and we're looking for those liabilities that will bear an interest charge, and they're going to the gearing ratio. Now, are you all quite comfortable with the leverage and gearing calculation, or would you like me just to quickly go through those two again?
We'll do them again, yes.
Okay, we'll do it again. We'll just do one year, and let's do the final year. So what we're looking for in the final year is the leverage, so that's all the liabilities divided by net worth. So all those figures are going to come from the balance sheet. So we'll do this together from the balance sheet. So here we have the balance sheet on page 12. what we're going to be looking for the leverage is all of the liabilities. So I'm going to start by looking at current liabilities, which I've got total there 435,000.
Yes.
Yes.
So we make a note 435. And then we're going to go down the balance sheet looking for any long-term liabilities. Yes, there are some at 7,000. So that gives us total liabilities of 442, which we're going to divide by the net worth of the business. And the net worth of the business in this particular case consists of the share capital and some retained profits. And you can see it's called, in this particular case, the shareholders' funds at 98,000. So you're going to divide 442 and divide that by 98. And tell me what you get for the answer.
4.5.
4.5?
Yes.
Okay. So you can put it as 4.5 to 1, or you can express it as a percentage, which I actually prefer because, again, my experience has been in discussion with customers, they get a more ready grasp on a percentage. So if you say to them, oh, well, you're 4.5 to 1 leverage, they might not get that so quickly as if you said, oh, by the way, your leverage in your business is quite high, and you might have to explain that that's all the liabilities relative to the capital net worth position, and it's actually 450%. And I think you'd agree with me, that sounds, instinctively you would feel, gosh, 450%, that sounds a pretty high figure, yes? So that's why I like the percentages. And then if we look at the gearing, so this time what we're looking for is the interest-bearing liability. So all we have to do is the same thing, except this time we're going through the liabilities. Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Morning.
So we're going through the liabilities, and we're just going to pick out those liabilities where we think there's an interest charge, and this time we're going to put these figures in as the interest-bearing liabilities, and this will give us the gearing ratio. So credit is 280,000. Normally there's no interest charge, unless there's some sort of penalty clause within the agreement. So we're not going to include that. Hire purchase, that's like installment financing. Yes, there'd be an interest charge. So if you put a tick or a cross against that 2,000, because we're going to include that in our gearing calculation. The bank, yes, the bank will be charging interest. So that 138 is going to go in. Tax, no, again, unless there's a penalty. Now, directors' loans, we would have to inquire whether there was any interest charge on the directors' loan monies to the business, but I think we said for the purpose of this exercise, we're going to assume that there isn't. We're going to assume, it's almost quasi type of capital, so we didn't put the 10 in. So let's move further down. The long-term liabilities. There we have, yes, look, long-term hire purchase or installment financing, 7,000. So that's going to go in to the gearing calculation. So I've got 2, 138, and 7, so that gives me 147. To divide once again by the net worth of 98. So what do you get for that calculation?
1.5.
1.5?
Yes.
So 150%, yes?
Yes.
So the leverage at 450% is extremely high, and the gearing at 150%, I think you'll agree with me, sounds quite high, but not as extremely high as the leverage, which gives you an instant picture that the business must be relying on a lot of other creditors as well as the bank. And we can verify that thought by just looking, at the liabilities and the balance sheet once again there. So we can see, look at the trade creditors, look, 280,000 the business owes its suppliers, and 138,000 owed to the bank. So you can see he's owing his suppliers, almost twice as much as he's owing the trade suppliers. So quite a significant amount of. So in summary on the ratios, the sales ratios increase look good, but all the profitability margins were deteriorating, which is quite worrying. Working capital, current ratio, quick ratio, we couldn't make too much of a conclusion from those because we've got to get in behind the figures. But then those important ratio, the debtor collection. Now I had, for debtors, I had 61 days, 59 days, and 65. Did you have the same figures?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Good. So you could see two things there. The first observation is it's getting slightly worse, going out to 65 days. But the second observation is 65 days to collect in the money that's due to the business sounds pretty long. You know, it's over 2 months. So a key question during the interview would be, what are the terms of trade? Yeah? So if he says to you, oh, well, I do give my customers 2 months to pay, well then 61 days, 59 days and 65 doesn't sound too bad. But I suspect if we asked him that question, he'd probably say, oh, well, I give them the normal 30 days credit, and it's taken them 61, 59, 65 days to pay, so they're taking twice as long to pay the business as they should, so this will have an extreme effect on the cash flow. Miguel has a question?
No, I just asked you if you were loud enough, that's all.
Well, I've got my volume full up, have you?
Yeah.
Yes. Good.
Okay. Then the next one was the stock level, so this is how quickly the inventory's turning over. And the figures I had there were 61 days, 72 and 78. You get that?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Now again, this is a worrying trend because don't forget, the stock is his business.
Mm-hmm.
You know, his business is all about selling these clothes, and it's taken him 2 months on average to turn over his inventory in year 1, but then it slips to 72 days and then gets worse to 78 days. So there's two things there, and one, it's quite a worrying trend, and second is, you know, 78 days, it seems a long time to turn over the clothing stock. So again, there's lots and lots of information coming out of these ratios, you know, that would help us with the interview discussion with the client.
I have a question.
So, yes?
Given the stock levels that they're going up and the inventory itself that it's increasing,
Yes.
might you want to ask them if they have clothes and that they can't sell anymore?
Definitely. Excellent question. We were going to come on to that. Did you have any questions on this? And that's a very, very pertinent question. There might be some damaged stock in the warehouse, yeah? You know, they might have had some flooding damage or something, or there might be stock there because clothing is such a fashionable thing that they're having difficulty selling, yeah? So this might account, you know, for the slower moving figures. So very good. So what you can see from this type of analysis is that I know it's a lot of hard work, but it is a lot of good preparation, whatever business you're looking at, or indeed, you know, when we did the personal financial planning cases, you know, again, trying to do your homework before you meet the client stands you in very, very good stead. It's a good question coming through there. Then, if the stock is taking longer to sell, what sort of impact will that have on the cash flow? Will it be good or bad?
Bad.
Bad, yeah. It's taking longer to sell and to generate cash flow. Now the next one is the trade creditors. So don't forget, these are the suppliers to clothing imports. These are the payables using the American terminology. So let's see how quickly he's paying his suppliers. 63 days, 69, 85. Did you all get those figures?
Yes.
Yeah. Again, two aspects coming out of this. Very worrying trend. He was paying his suppliers in approximately 2 months. Now it's 85 days, almost 3 months to pay his suppliers. Now that is good for cash flow because he's taking longer to pay, but it's very, very risky in terms of business strategy, because if you alienate your suppliers, you know, you don't get any supplies of clothes, you've got no business, have you? You know, all you've got left as your business is what you've got in that warehouse. You know, you've got no new incoming stock if the suppliers refuse to supply you because you're not paying. And the second question, of course, is what's the terms of trade? So this time, it's what's the terms of trade that the suppliers are giving to clothing imports. And if he says, well, it's the usual terms of trade, I should be paying in 30 days, well, goodness me, there's a problem there, isn't there? You know, 30 days he should be paying, he's paying in 63, 69, and 85 days. So again, you know, another worrying trend coming up from this business. So where are we so far? Well, there's quite a number of worrying things coming out. So if you go back to the brief on the opening page, the second bullet point, so we've been doing the first, analyze business performance. We've only got the cash flow to do to complete that, which we're going to turn to in a few minutes. But that second point, he explains the business is expanding. Well, we know that, we've seen the figures, but he wants to discuss with you future investment plans. Now, how can he make investment plans? What does he need to do to be able to financially afford investment plans?
Needs to make some money.
Yeah, definitely. Well, good. He needs to make some money, very well said. And going on from that, not only does he need to make some money, but he needs to generate some cash flow that's available for investments, yeah? And from what we've seen so far, we're a bit worried about his cash flow. So the next logical step is to try and extract ourselves the cash flow. Now, this is the trickiest part, and possibly the trickiest part of any program that we do, like anywhere in the world, is the cash flow side. It should be easy. Our personal cash flow is easy. You know, you've got some cash coming in, you've got cash going out. You know, are you positive or are you negative? Business cash flow is more difficult, but in principle it should be the same. So what cash flow is coming into the business? What cash flow is going out? And is there any left over? Lots of businesses won't have any cash flow left over, which is why they come to the financial institutions, yes? Now, there's nothing wrong in that, as long as the business, as it moves forward, is able to sustain, you know, those levels of debt that the business is carrying, because the debt requirement has to be serviced. So let's turn to the cash flow worksheet that Miguel printed out for you, an extra copy there, a blank sheet for you there, cash flow worksheet. I'm just going to try and get mine on the screen. There we are. Now, the reason that we developed this cash flow worksheet a long time ago, it was actually developed when I did this book for the Financial Times in 1994. So it was a long time ago, over 20 years ago now, gosh. But the reason for the cash flow book internationally, you know, was for the reason that people do have difficulty understanding the cash flows. So this was translated also into Italian and into Spanish as well. So it was quite a popular book at the time. And this worksheet we put in the book to try and aid the comprehension of the cash flow. Why? Because unfortunately the cash flows tend to be stated in different ways, and we found if you could summarize it, you know, on a common style template, it should give us an indication of what's going on. So whether you're looking at a US style cash flow, or whether you're looking at an international one, or whether you're in discussion with the accountants about the cash flow, if you use this cash flow worksheet, it should help you simplify the understanding of the cash flow worksheet. So let me take you through it to start with, and then we'll backtrack onto the closing case, and we'll complete the cash flow worksheet to finally answer the question that we're slightly worried about the cash flow position. By using this worksheet, we should be able to quantify it as to whether he's positive or negative. So straight away, I'm going to jump down the worksheet. Can you see the line that I've got numbered? I hope it's on your worksheet, line D.
Yes.
Is it not on it? Yeah. Line D is the one you need to highlight or underline or put a star against, because line D is the net cash flow position for any business that you're looking at, with the exception of banks and financial institutions, because their cash flow is totally different. But this could be for Walmart, it could be for Atlantis Hotel, it could be for John Bull, and it can be for clothing imports. We can summarize any cash flow in this format, and we'll get down to line D, which will tell us. So against line D, you need to write just to the left of the letter D, is the business cash positive or negative? Is the business cash positive or negative? And that's the key point for us as financial planners. And I regret to say that quite often the business person won't know. Now you can say, well, they should know, because you know they've probably got an accountant. But the problem is the accountant may only be doing, you know, a straightforward audit of the books. He might not be preparing this type of cash flow for the client. The good news for you is, as time goes forward, we'll get more and more cash flows prepared by the accountants. So when you open the financial statements going forward, you'll see the balance sheet, the income statement, and the cash flow analysis in one or two different ways, depending on the accountancy jurisdiction. So let's take a look. Now where the cash flow worksheet starts, excuse me, is with this point, which has caused a lot of confusion historically. Because historically, if you looked at some accountancy textbooks, and if you looked at Moody's rating agency for many, many years, the definition of cash flow was EBITDA. You've probably heard the expression EBITDA. Some of the commentators still use it on Bloomberg's and CNN News. EBITDA, look, is line A. So you can see straight away that this is only at the top of the cash flow. So how can it be the cash flow? It can't be the full cash flow. So they're correct in saying the definition of cash flow is EBITDA, but they should refine that by saying the definition of part of the cash flow, or definition of the opening part of the cash flow, being more precise still, is EBITDA. So can you see where that cash flow is coming from? It's coming from operations, isn't it? Mm-hmm. So this is why we call it the gross operating cash flow. So that comes from the profit before interest and tax, which would come from the income statement, yes? And then we add back depreciation, as we discussed before, because depreciation is a non-cash item. It's a charge against the assets on the basis that most assets tend to deteriorate. But you never write a check out or pay cash for depreciation. So in terms of cash flow, we're entitled to add that back to give us line A. So that's like the entry point. I'm just walking you through this, and then when we do it, from the figures, hopefully it'll become clearer. Then this next section, you can see, look, there's those figures we've been talking about. And the important word in the next section to highlight is movements. So can you highlight movements in stock, debtors and creditors? So it's not the actual balance, it's the movements in the balances that will affect the cash flow. So two very important things coming out so far. Line D is the net cash flow, and this section, the second section there, is the movements in the cash flow. And then what we're going to do is line B, good morning to the two ladies who just arrived. Line B is a subtotal of those items. The movements in stock, the movements in debtors, the movements in creditors, all that box there will give us that subtotal B, which we called in 1994, for the purpose of that cash flow book, we called it change in working investment. Some people, if you want to make a note there, some people call it the change in working capital. And nowadays we tend to call it a much more modern term, we call it CCC, the cash conversion cycle. So there's three terms, meaning the same thing. Change in working capital, change in working investment, or the cash conversion cycle is the more modern term. So what you can see next then is we're going to take B away from A to give us that next line, which is called the net operating cash flow. And you can see I put in brackets there, A plus minus B. Now 99 cases out of 100 it will be A minus B. Why? Because most businesses you'll be looking at use cash flow in the working capital cycle. There are some businesses that generate cash flow. For example, the large supermarkets where they have a very fast cash conversion cycle, such as your large supermarket stores there in Nassau, same as we have in the UK, Sainsbury's, Tesco, people like that. They generate cash flow from this section, but practically every business you can ever think of uses cash flow in that section. So the net operating cash flow generally will be A minus B to give us that net operating cash flow position. And then it's from that area there that interest will be paid, any dividend will be paid, any long-term debt that's due within 12 months. And that will give us line C. That's the net cash flow after debt servicing. And then we've got fixed asset expenditure or disposals. If it's a disposal, it's going to generate cash flow. Capital expenditure will be a negative. And then we've got taxation if they're in a jurisdiction, where tax is payable. And then finally we'll get to this line D, which is the line we've been trying to get to, which is the net cash flow position. Now quite often, as your business experience develops, quite often you'll find businesses generate cash at line A, and quite often you'll find businesses, by the time they get past line B and they get to net operating cash flow, quite often you'll find, oh, they're still okay, but then maybe the interest burden's too high, or maybe they're spending too much on capital expenditure, etc., which swings the cash flow into a negative. So this is the power of this simple stylized document. Then later we'll come on to what happens if they're negative at D, the net cash flow, or if they're positive. Because there's only three things, as we mentioned before, that can be done with the cash flow after that position. Okay, so what we'll do next is we'll do the cash flow together for the first year. Well, sorry, it's for the second year because we need the figures moving from year 1 to year 2. So we'll do the cash flow together for year 2, and then I'll let you have a go working with the person next to you or working on your own for doing the cash flow for year 3. So on your cash flow worksheet, if you put year 2 at the top there, and then to the right hand side, where there's a little bit of space, put year 3. So we'll start by looking at year 2. Now this is where you're going to need to do a bit of juggling, because you're going to be juggling between the cash flow worksheet and juggling between the pages of the case study. So I'd advise you to probably take them out of your folders. So you're going to need the income statement for some of the figures, you're going to need the balance sheet for some of the figures, and you're going to need sheet called the Statement of Cash Flows. And you'll see this document doesn't make a lot of sense the way it's set up, which is why we'll use the worksheet to try and make more sense of what we're looking at. So we'll be flipping between those documents. So try and get yourself like well organised. You've got your paperwork there, and you've got your cash flow. And I'd really recommend, if you can, work on this with the person next to you, just to try and help each other, because this is a bit tricky. So here we go. We're going to start by looking at that opening item on the cash flow worksheet. I'm going to try and just stretch this across a bit on my screen to see if I can get it. Okay, year two. So year two opening figure, you can see is the profit before interest and tax. So if we go into the income statement, we're looking at year two, and we're looking for the profit before interest and tax. There it is, $34,500. Yes? Everybody got that?
Yep. I don't believe it.
So put that into your worksheet. I put 34.5. I'm just going to work it this way to try and make it a bit simpler on the screen for me. Then we need to add back depreciation. Now, depreciation is a bit difficult to get hold of because it's not featured in detail in the income statement. But the good news is we can use some of the cash flow figures that the accountant kindly prepared. So if you look at the cash flow statements, can you see on that statement of cash flow by the accountants, there's the depreciation at $2,000. So we can put that 2 in. So that gives me a gross operating cash flow in year two. The opening position is $36,500. So his opening position looks reasonably okay, yeah? So it's positive. We've got $36,500 coming in from the operations of the business. Now the next items we're going to treat. Gentleman in the back has a question?
Yeah, I wanted to know where would be able to locate other non-cash items if there were any.
Well, it should be featured in the income statement or in the notes to the accounts, yeah? But generally most businesses, it'll be depreciation, but some larger businesses you might look at, for example, say a business is trading internationally and they have maybe a foreign currency account. If at the date of the balance sheet when they revalued the foreign currency that's being held, if that value was higher than it was before, that gain in value wouldn't be gained through trading and it wouldn't be gained through cash flow. It would be a non-cash item, yeah? So there's an example. Another non-cash item could be where there's been an acquisition of a business and the business purchasing is paid for goodwill. If the goodwill is written off by the acquiring business over a number of years, you would find that goodwill write-off being treated. And again, of course, it's a non-cash item, yes? Do you get, is that okay for you?
Correct.
So there'll be a number of items, but quite honestly, most of the time it will only be depreciation. And if there are other non-cash items, they will be stated in the accounts, yes? So the next section is the movements. So highlight that movements. I asked you to movements in stock. Now before we do the stock movement, let me ask you a question. Try and think as business people. If we think as the business owners of clothing imports, if we had stock 1 year of say $100,000, and in the next year our stock had increased to $150,000. So in other words, we're holding more stock. Would that use cash flow, or would it generate cash flow?
Generate cash flow. Well,
Come on, be bold.
I'm going to say lose.
It's a use, yeah. When we sell the stock, when we sell the 150,000 of stock, that'll generate cash flow.
Yeah.
But because it's increased from 100,000 to 150,000, our business, it's got to be financed in one way or another, so it's actually a use of cash flow. So let's look at the stock movement. So if we look at the balance sheet, and we're looking for the movement between year 1 and year 2, so there's the stock. I'm just trying to move these around on the screen a bit. Now there's the movement in stock. Look, it's gone from 135,000 to 190.
yes.
Yes. So there's a movement in stock of $55,000. Stock's increased. So as we've been discussing, if the stock increases, it's got to be financed. So stock on our cash flow worksheet, we're going to put it in as $55,000, and we're going to put it in brackets. Why? Because it's cash going out. And you see under the modern treatments of cash flows, every time going forward in the cash flow analysis, you see cash moved in brackets, it means cash going out. If you see a positive figure, it's positive. There's been a lot of confusion in the past, but the accountants have agreed going forward, that we're treated in this way. So stock 55,000. Whoops, it's gone a bit askew on my screen here. I'll try again. No, it won't go in. 55. I'll have to put it over here. 55 in brackets.
Question for you. Might we want to ask the client about the inventory? I mean, the number is high from year 1 to year 2 and going up. If maybe he is buying a higher quality, type of clothes and stuff like that?
Yeah, definitely. Very good question. We'd want, when we've summarized this, and then we get around to the stage today where we want to start talking with the person next to us, and we want to start talking about this case, about how we would tackle this case. This is the type of question that we want to be coming up with. So if you don't mind, I'll just park that one to the side for the moment. And then when we've done the cash flows and we come back to the financial planning bit, yes, where we're going to use all this information to start constructing our interview, then that's a great question, just like the earlier one that you had, about is there any of the stock that's unsaleable, yeah? Is that okay for the moment?
Sure.
Sure. So let's just focus on the maths just for the moment. So I'm not pushing you away. These questions are really, really good. What we're trying to do is just get the maths together, and then we can see another question that we'll be asking him is about his cash flow. And does he realise what his cash flow position is? The interesting question to ask. So debtors. It's the same question to you. If you imagine you're the business owners, let's imagine our business, there are debts due to us, that's receivables or debtors due to us, to say $100,000, and then in the next year, this debt's due to us of $150,000. Is that a source of cash flow or is it a use?
Use.
It's a use again because we're going to have to finance that higher level of debtors or that higher level of receivables until we can get it collected in. So a very good answer. It's a use again, which means it's going to go in brackets. So we need the figure. So what's the movement in debtors?
20,000.
Yeah, from 150 to 170, thank you. So 20,000 in brackets. So you can see the first two items are both negative movements. Then the next one is the suppliers. So supplier credits. So let's do the same logical approach. So thinking about it being our business again, if we owe our suppliers, for the suppliers of clothes coming to us, let's say we owe them $100,000, and then let's say next year we owe them $150,000, is that a source of cash flow or a use of cash flow? Yes, source. Brilliant, because we've gained more credit, yeah? So it's a source of credit, so it's a source of cash flow. Very, very good. So let's look at this figure. So creditors have gone up from 140 to 180. So that's a movement of $40,000.
Yes.
But this time it's a positive figure. Now, I know you're going to ask me about prepayments, accruals, any sundry items. Well, there might be, and again, these would be featured in the accounts, but there's none on this particular case. There's no prepayments mentioned, there's no accruals mentioned, there's no sundry items. So in terms of our construction of that subtotal B, the change in working capital, or change in working investment, or the cash conversion cycle, it's those three. So we've got 55 negative, 20 negative, that gives us 75,000 negative cash flow, and then we've got relief of 40, but it gives us the change in the working investment there of $35,000?
35,000.
35,000 negative, yeah? So in brackets. So there's an example, as I said earlier. Most businesses you look at, when you complete this section B, or the accountant, better still, the accountant working with the business person helps construct this, because in practice you would never be expected to construct this. So you might be asking, well, why on earth is Keith getting us all this pain of constructing this? Well, the reason we do it this way is because if you can construct it, you then have a great comprehension of where these figures come from. You know, when a document's given to you, or when there's no document, and the accountant in the meetings trying to figure out the figures, etc. So you'll have a good understanding. So what we need to do is, this is our subtotal, and the next line is the net operating cash flow, which we said is A plus or minus B. Well, it's going to be minus because it's a negative there. If line B had been plus 35, we would have added it to the 36.5, yeah? But because it's a negative, we're going to take it away. So we've got 36.5 minus 35 gives us a negative 1.5.
Positive.
No, positive.
Negative.
Positive. Positive.
Thank you very much. Wow. You're really sharp for a Saturday morning, wasn't it? Saturday afternoon here, that's why I'm slipping away a bit. nearly 4 o'clock here. Well done. Yeah, 1.5 positive, so that's good news. He's positive, but it's bad news in that, gosh, he's only got $1,500 and he hasn't paid his interest yet. Is there any dividend? We don't know. Is there any fixed asset expenditure? We haven't looked at that yet. Is there any tax to pay? So the cash flow from being reasonably healthy, line A, gross operating entry cash flow $36,500, it's suddenly shrunk dramatically to only $1,500. So let's have a look what comes next. Well, what comes next is the interest expense. So we need to go into the income statement. Here we are. Don't forget we're looking at year 2. So interest paid in year 2, $8,500. Now, of course, when you pay interest, it's definitely cash going out. It's definitely not cash coming in. Interest received will be cash coming in. Interest paid is going out, 8.5. So I'm putting this in brackets. And then we'll pause just for a second, because look at this as an anomaly. When you did the ratio interest cover, on your summary ratio worksheet, what did you get for year 2? You got coverage, didn't you?
Mm-hmm.
But can you see that coverage came from the income statement and it came from profits? So yes, that's how interest cover has worked. It's been worked that way for 50 years or more. And we're not suggesting to anybody you throw it away, because it's still a very, very important calculation. But what we've come up with now is a second calculation, which is called cash flow interest cover. So what we've got is we've got we've got cover from profitability from the income statement. But I think you'd agree with me that probably the most important coverage is out of cash flow, because that's where they've got to pay you. If you're in the bank holding the debt, they've got to pay the interest charge, and it's going to come out of cash flow, isn't it? Because it appears on the bank statement. You guys charge the interest onto the bank statement, so it's going to come out of cash flow. So that goes in brackets. So you can see in terms of cash flow, this business does not have enough cash flow to pay the bank's interest cost charges. So in terms of cash flow management, it's very poor already. So where is he going to get the cash flow from to pay the bank? Interesting question. So let's go a bit further down. There's no dividend on this particular case. There's no long-term debt due within the next 12 months on this particular case that we know about. So line C will be the same as 1.5 minus 8.5. So I'm right this time, we're negative, aren't we?
Yeah.
7,000?
7.
Yes? So after servicing the debt, the business has swung into a negative cash flow position. Let's see what comes next. Now this next bit's tricky, because this is an example, as we'll see, where the accountant's figures look a bit skewy, and we've got to trust our logical deductions, because we're going to have to balance this. Because if you look just to the bottom of the cash flow worksheet for a second, can you see right at the bottom I've got net movement in cash, and I've got that with an asterisk, and below that I'm giving the keywords reconcile with source documents, which will be the balance sheet of the business. So the cash flow's got to balance. If it doesn't, we know we've made a mistake somewhere. Okay? And it's the same under modern cash flow analysis. The accountants have got to balance the cash flow statement against the source documents, which makes the cash flow statement a very, very powerful document for us as financial planners. So, having said that, let's draw a breath and have a look at what figures we've got from the accountants. So let's have a look at the capital expenditure in the statement of cash flows. Now this is where we're going to have to be really, really careful. Because can you see where he's got application of funds? So that means using cash flow, doesn't it? When you talk about an application, that means using cash flow. But then can you look at the next line? It says purchase of fixed assets, but it then says sale of fixed assets in brackets. Now that's got to be like a glaring error, because if you sell a fixed asset, it's going to generate cash, isn't it? It's not going to be a negative. So we have to trust our judgment that if, in fact, he sold a fixed asset, it's going to generate cash flow. And if he's purchased fixed assets, as they have done, look in the next year. Can you see the next year? There's a purchase of fixed assets of 7,000. So these are where some errors have come in. The 7,000 should be in brackets, and this bit always confuses people. I'm sorry about it, but we have to trust our judgment. If we sold an asset to generate $1,000, we're going to take a chance and put it in our worksheet as a positive figure, and we can come back if we don't balance. So I'm putting 1,000 under the fixed asset expenditure. I can't get it quite lined up, but I've got 1,000 there. And then I'm going to have some tax that's payable. Now tax, of course, when you pay tax, it's a use of cash flow, definitely. So let's look on the same page what he's got for tax paid. Here, look, there's another terrible example. $8,000. Positive figure should be in brackets, shouldn't it? You'd agree? Just from your own common sense, logical approach, tax paid's got to be a negative, right? So we'll stick to our opinions, go back to a cash flow worksheet. As I say, we've got to balance this thing. So in brackets, I'm going to put 8,000. Now the gentleman at the back probably might say, why doesn't that agree with the income statement? Well, the difference is, you often see this in financial statements, that the tax actually paid out of cash flow doesn't actually equate to the tax in the income statement. Why? Because the tax in the income statement is an estimate of tax that's due on the profits that's being earned, but because of timing differences and because of possible tax adjustments, the tax that's actually paid would be the tax that's actually paid out of the cash flow, yeah? So you have to trust me there again. So let's have a look at our bottom line position. So we had 7,000 negative with C, then we gained 1,000 to give us 6 negative, but then we've got another 8 negative for tax. So line D, negative 14,000, correct? Does everybody get that?
Yes.
Okay, now what we're going to try and do is balance it, and then we're going to take a 5-minute break after we've
Now,
balanced it.
go through that a little bit.
Please.
Yeah?
Yeah, once more, please, because we changed up some stuff. So you're saying that we sold something for $1,000, which is why we gained $1,000,
Correct?
and we purchased something for $7,000, which is why we lost it. And at the same time, we understand that because we paid out tax, 8,000 to 5,000 should be negative also. Okay, could you
Yes.
can you continue from there, please?
Yeah, fixed asset sale of 1,000, so I put it in my worksheet. I don't know if you can see my worksheet on the screen, it's probably far too small.
Yes.
I'll try and enlarge it a bit. Can you see I've got 1,000 coming in for fixed assets? It's not lined up properly, I'm sorry about that. Then there's 8,000 negative for tax, because you know as well as I do, when you pay tax, it's a negative out of cash flow. So does everybody get D at 14,000 negative? Because we're going to try and balance this, and then it'll prove whether we were correct in taking that sale of $1,000 as a positive figure, yeah? So we've got to balance that 14. Now just before we balance it, it's interesting to look back up, because here you have an opening cash flow at line A of positive $36,500. So clothing imports entry point's positive, but look at his finishing point, D, he's 14,000 negative. So when people say to you, oh, profit equals cash flow, you have to say, I'm sorry, that's not true. And if you want an example to illustrate it, you could illustrate it with this very example. Profit does not equal cash flow. Yes, profit will be part of the cash flow, but it's not the total picture. And this case illustrates it. Here's a business making profit before interest and tax, $34,500, but that's not the cash flow. The cash flow is line D. Now this is where you'll find probably the most scope for yourselves in terms of financial planning conversation, in terms of business people's understanding, you know, of the cash flows. And this will stand you in good stead. The other areas of investment, you know, this guy's coming to see you to talk about possible investment. How is he going to have an investment? Where's he going to get the cash from? You know, look at what you've got in front of you. He's actually got a cash negative. So how is he going to finance an investment from a negative $14,000? So let's just balance it and then take a short 5-minute break. Now, again, if you want to write just to the left of where it says external finance, increase in equity, short-term debt, and net movement in cash, if you want to write the words just to the left of there, that when you're trying to balance the cash, there's only 3 possible sources. It's cash from cash reserves, it's debt from debt providers, and it's equity or capital coming into the business. There's only those 3, because everything else you can think of is already in the cash flow worksheet. So there's only those 3 sources. Cash.
Could you repeat the last one?
Reserves,
Could you repeat
cash
the
from
last
cash
one?
reserves, debt, or new equity or capital coming into the business, yeah? If it's a big business listed on the stock market, they could raise some new equity by way of shares. If it's a small business, it's got to be an injection of capital. So let's try and balance it, take a short break, and then we'll talk some more. So here we go. Increase in equity. Where would we find that from? The balance sheet? Let's have a look.
Balance sheet.
Let's see if there's any new capital coming in. Can't see any. Share capital 2020, so there's no new capital being introduced, so that's a 0 on your worksheet. Against equity, put 0 or a dash, whatever you prefer. Now next is short-term debt. So let's have a look again, the balance sheet. Has he gained any cash flow from short-term debt? Well, we suspect the answer will be yes. Let's have a look. So short-term debt, look, there's the bank. The bank balance has increased from 90,000 to 105,000. So how much has he gained in short-term debt? 15,000, hasn't he, yeah? Don't forget, an increase in debt at the bank is a source of cash flow, isn't it? And if you go into the bank and get an overdraft, that's a source of cash flow. So we've got 15,000 in the short-term debt on our worksheet, and it's a source, so it's positive 15. And then long-term debt, let's look at long-term debt, back into the balance sheet. Now here's a movement, look, long-term hire purchase, installment financing. What's the movement there? Well, it's gone down from 6,000 debt to 5,000. So he's actually paid that debt down. So would that be a source of cash flow or a use?
Use.
It's a use, so it's going to go in brackets, and we've quantified it, it's $1,000. So let's put that in the worksheet in brackets, 1,000. So there you are, we've got 2 out of 3 items now. There's no movement in equity. We've got 15,000 that he's gained from more short-term debt, but he's used 1,000 to pay down the debt. Now the only item we haven't treated is the net movement in cash. And from our calculations on the screen, what do you think the net movement in cash will be?
14,000.
No? You were short 40 in a D, right?
It's 0.
And because they're short, they've got to get it from somewhere. And I said to you there's only 3 sources. Cash from cash reserves, debt, or new equity or capital coming in. There's no capital coming in. We got 15 from debt, short term. 1 long-term debt we paid, so there's 14,000 there. Positive to balance the 14,000 negative in D. So what's your expectation for the movement in cash?
0.
Zero, exactly, well done. So, our expectation to balance the books is a net movement in cash, which we'd find from the source document, which would be the balance sheet. There should be a zero movement. So let's hold our breath and hope we balance, so we can have a 5-minute break. So let's look at the cash. In the balance sheet, year 1 cash,
Zero.
0. Year 2 cash,
Zero.
0. So movement in cash, 0. We balance. Brilliant. Well done. Now I know you're going to have loads of questions on this, but I'm going to take a 5-minute break just to ease my throat. And then what we'll do, you have a stretch of legs or whatever. In 5 minutes we'll reconvene, and you have a go working with the person next to you at the cash flow for year 3. And let's see if year 3 is positive or negative, and see if we can balance it. And then we'll get into the final part, which is the really interesting part that all of this preparation has been building up on, is the interview with the customer, as financial planners. So we're going to need to come up with ideas, questions, lists of stuff, and things like that. Okay, we'll just take a short 5-minute break. Thank you.
You just said the last part. The cash. The net movement in cash.
Yeah, we had zero in our balance sheet. And still zero in there too, so there was no more.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so 0 minus 0, 0. So we had to prove the net movement in cash. If this was 100 and this was 200, it would the net movement would have been 100, and we would have to come to 100. Yeah.
So this and this was the balance.
Yeah, the movement.
The movement.
Yes.
So the cash figure on the balance sheet and the cash figure and the cash was balance.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. All right. That was just so lost. Okay. I'm gonna do year 3. You say year 3, right? So I'm paid to be late to class. Cause I just trying to catch up. Okay.
This was year 2. Oh, okay. So
Oh, sorry.
Might as well go out of business. Might as well shut down.
this one here.
This is two.
Exactly.
Which made this. So where's this one?
Because you in the other piece you get.
This the negative 15.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I have. That's 8,000. Say it one more time.
What are you saying about the fixed asset expenditure? Because we changed the figure. So
Yeah,
this
you
7,000 is a
It's
purchase.
a purchase. So you're gonna lose cash.
You're gonna lose
So it'll be a negative figure.
Okay, so we purchased that for 7,000 and we paid our tax for 5,000.
Right, so both of them are gonna be negative.
Okay, so make sure.
This is better?
Okay, just stop.
This cash flow question. Just 35. So this is 35.
Okay, then the next thing to do is have a go at the next year cash flow, working with your neighbour. You've probably started that already. You can hear me okay?
Yes.
Good.
We did some of them to me about the cash flow question. I get it straight down, but then when you get here, back at zero. It is zero. So how do we confirm it was zero? This one?
Yes, so this
Of the cash.
Is that fair?
0 minus 0 cancel, minus 0.
Okay, so I didn't understand how we find the loss. Like how the figures wrong. Calculation.
That this,
Oh,
so this,
Put these two together.
Yeah.
Should balance out.
to 0.
Okay,
So you're doing year 3 now. So you
so therefore this figure here and this here.
Yeah, I guess the margin.
They get 10,000 more than they should.
That's all of us say.
You got 33 and then 2.
2, 25. Is it 19? Or 28?
No, that's why different too. 15. You have 57.
57 and 60.
60 is 230. 170. Oh no, sorry, that's because that's my bad.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. I did that for my error. 297 minus 190 is 67. Okay, so minus 67.
I'm getting $16.
Okay, so that's 67.
60,000.
before you made it. Before you made it.
No, I'm still coming down the street.
It's imbalanced.
It's negative. 67, negative 66, negative. And that's over 100. And then you add 100 back. That's why that's 12. That's where you're
Okay. So everything that is just like budget. How about that?
So you have the balance. What's your figures for what you got for net cash flow before financing?
35.
Okay, so what you got for your short term business?
Positive 33.
That's probably where going why you had that wrong. Positive 33 for short term, yeah. Oh yeah, sure, yeah, that wrong. But 23,000. Okay.
Alrighty, yeah.
Alright, cool. Gotcha. So that thing up, 23,000 there. Okay.
Hopefully when the companies come into your office, they come with all this information.
Come on, make cash flow and then.
Good luck with that.
Tell big lights much easier. See this and this guy, he might as well just give up.
This is a negative, this is a positive.
53?
Is that, yeah. So you get 23, 7, and 5, so you get 35. 23, yeah. Other incomes good, we have started with 5, right? Yeah, we have that 23 goes to the yeah. So the Sophia was 11. 1,005, if you look at your feature. So you have 8,005 is next to 11.
Oh,
The 23 is here. Right. So now you're 23 minus 7 minus 5 is 0. That's 12. That's 35. Okay, therefore you have negative 6. Well, this one is positive 35 and a positive 2.
it's a positive.
Because you start with negative 35, so we need to bring that down to 0, so we need positive down there.
But on the paper, yeah, on the sheet.
Yeah,
It should add up to 30,
It
positive
is 35, but yeah, I thought, how did it
no brackets, yeah, no brackets on the 35, no
'Cause
brackets on the 2.
you got a minus that from the net cash flow before financing.
Positive, so for 33, we go to the bank,
just because I got there?
we went up.
We went up.
So 138 minus 105 is 0.
35.
Yeah, 33. So that's positive, not negative. You see you have negative in there.
So that's money that we got from the bank.
Oh, with this one, oh, with the first one you did the opposite. This was supposed to be the first, see, it was positive 15, and then the
That's what I
plus.
was like.
Okay.
Yeah,
Oh,
'cause
that's why he wasn't coming back to 0. That's why he was asking you a
Because
question.
in that section, that's money that we got from bankers.
So the top, okay, that's when they got in credit. Cash flow in, and this is my payout.
So we remove
This is
these two
credit.
brackets.
Okay.
Okay, remove those two brackets.
Yeah, so that makes sense. So we had a cash flow of negative 35 before we finance. And then we get all our money from the bank. Cancel out that 35 using this way you got it rough.
That's why he just like
Yeah.
it's a mess.
So very big.
When the statements come in, you understand them.
They can do that.
Especially if something's like a business, you know?
$5,000 tax.
It's a cash flow, but then
See what I'm saying? We paid this. So that should have been a negative.
It'd be nice if they give us some numbers though, to just make people know. They're gonna say they're supposed to be coming back to this 0, but that's not
Paying
what
tax,
you're
that's
supposed to be
what
coming
you
back to. You're supposed to be coming back to the difference.
And I'm just saying we
Oh.
purchased.
So technically, because it's
Subject
zero,
to that.
that's why it's kind of easy. Technically, there are numbers there. We come back to this here.
No, not the difference, right? See, the difference between 0 minus 0 is 0. It's the difference.
So they get a
In
real
the cash.
in the cash. So they get another paid study and the figures are here. I'm here looking for the difference, not the actual numbers.
So the difference was 15,000, then this number here needs to be 15,000. So if we go from 0 and he ended up with 15,000, then we have to figure.
Okay. And that's 35, so we're back to 0 again.
Okay, so
So the place here, he was in the hole for $14,000.
Second year, 35,000.
Extra 21,000.
this is just for me. Actually, to prove that when I go back, it's because
No.
Yeah, and then too for us to see really, because sometimes, you know, it depends on how the cash flow is prepared. It's being indirect. So sometimes looking at the cash flow doesn't really give us anything. Here we can see real numbers like he's saying gross operating
Think
cash
so.
flow, and we see working capital. So this is just a different way of calculating this.
these are important.
Should we go through it together?
Yes.
Okay, well, I got line D, I got minus 35,000.
Yes.
You got that?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, brilliant, well done. And then the financing, short-term debt 33,000. And movement in long-term debt, sourced some more long-term debt this time, 2,000. So 35 coming into balance. The negative with line D is 35,000 negative. So zero movement in cash again.
Yes.
Good. So you've done well on that. So entry point from profit again, 13,000, bit less this time. Depreciation was the same. So his EBITDA, or his opening, or his gross operating cash flow, we tend to call that GOCF, gross operating cash flow, at 15,000, so a lot less than the previous year. But then, big movement in stock again, big movement in debtors again, huge movement in supplier credit, $100,000 more supplier credit he gained. So that section B, thanks to the relief he got from the creditors, was negative 27. But some big figures going on in there. You know, 60,000 in stock, 67,000 debtors. So 27 is the resulting figure. And then this time, if you take A minus B, the bad news this time is he's negative 12,000. So last time he had $1,500 and couldn't pay his interest charges. This time he's negative $12,000 and he's got interest to pay of 11,000. So it's a much worse situation. Line C is much worse. Net cash flow 23. This time he's got purchase of fixed assets, despite all these negative cash flows. And you'll find this quite often. Businesses, you know, they buy more assets, thinking, oh well, I've made a profit, but can they afford the assets out of the cash flow? You know, and that's the key question. And often they can't, but they don't realise that. So you get these resultant negative cash flows. And he's got tax to pay again, although he didn't make so much profit, but there's some tax obviously carried forward from the previous period. So he ends up line D, $35,000 negative. How can he balance the books? Well, more short-term debt, more long-term debt, and no cash movement. And don't forget, here's the director coming in to see you to talk about an investment plan. And he was 14,000 negative the previous year, 35,000 negative the year that we're looking at. So next step then is working with the person next to you, having seen all those ratios that we pulled out, and now we have the benefit of the cash flows that they've extracted. What you now need to come up with is, you know, a few points, a few notes on a piece of paper between you about how you're going to tackle this interview. Because remember, you know, I think we did the Jane Brown interview. That was quite a long time ago. Jane Brown, did we do that case with you?
Yes.
Yeah. And Jane was coming in, you know, she got divorced from her husband, she was going to get divorce settlements, and they were going to buy a timeshare in Florida, and she was coming in the room all in a really fantastic mood, and you were going to have to take her down gently to enter into the real world of what's going on in terms of finance. Now here's this guy. You know, he's coming to see you to talk to you about investment plans. And from the analysis we've been doing, it looks as if he hasn't got a dollar to invest, and he's having to borrow just to keep the business going. So again, it's going to be a difficult interview. So give some thought, make a few notes. I'll give you some 10 minutes or so. I know that's quite a short time, but we've only got like the 2 hours together. And then we'll start to talk about some of the ideas that you had. So you've done, congratulations, you've done a lot of hard work. And now we come to the bit where, you know, we're going to be facing the client, us financial planners. You know, he's coming in with one expectation. We are coming out with our analysis with a different expectation. Okay, I'll stop talking for 10 minutes. And we'll reconvene at what time for you? Gosh, 11:45? 11:45, 10 minutes time. Yeah. I'll just mute the microphone for a minute. So.
And do your questions, discuss
The bullet point. Yeah, the 3 points at the first page. Okay, flip that page over. Okay, yeah.
Because he said he's coming into us asking us for
we need this guy.
investment. So we need to
I believe that I'm also
we're going to discussion with them to tell them, let them know gently again. We got something to do before we can get them some money.
you know, highlight the positive. Knowing that.
Yeah, so what's the positive?
Let's see the positive. We see you've been, you know, investing in your stock, you know, year over year. Can you answer the question? Tell me more about the type of
Not just the individual, this is the last the first and second class. Stage 14. Oh, really?
So you really work on this CFP study already?
Based on the ratio. Some groups. The key to that is calculating So we got carrying ratio. It was only the higher purchase, the client was which
The carrying ratio?
yeah, the carrying, that carrying.
It says
Total debt.
tangible net.
So the total debt was just the higher purchase, the client, and the long-term HP. So everything else was clear. He was saying it was just the total tax, just the bank tax, so like because the guarantee insurance to do with interest, which you pay only the interest. Sorry, it's the interest green debt. So what you pay interest on the high purchase, you're probably paying interest on that loan. Your bank only that rate you're paying interest on the long term HP.
It's part of loan interest. Okay, so it's just interest.
Just interest carrying that. And that's it. Everything else was pretty clear, pretty straightforward.
Okay, so I have a question. So, any positives though?
Exactly.
His sales. That's the only positive really. But that's probably not. He's coming with his like he's probably just putting it out and realizing, you know what? I'm going up to that month, right? And three, so he's thinking he's making more money. So he wants to know. And even though you're
The same day you're drinking again.
so for you says for fucking month, you used to make $10 on every $100, so now it's up to $7. So, and that property from us, it's almost 2%. First year, but now it's been
So you can just cash flows that may increase the you know, as what we put on.
the cash flow is going to be it's the negative cash flow. And so we can tell him this however, based on expenses and his future, which is other investments that he did. Purchase just on surplus and stuff like that. And all his cash flows now are this nice. For financing purposes. In past, when we say there's only 3 ways, then cash from cash reserves, which you got cash from there. I think that's what he coming to us for, cash from capital. So my thing is, he only, the only thing we want is the security of his property. And right now, we already own so much. What we do, this is balance loss. He owes us $138. This is only worth $98. So the security based on it at this time, you really can. Unless he increases this. Unfortunately, I feel, unfortunately, we may have to say no. Because we already owe something. The security we don't know is only 98. The whole big time. So we're asking if we can increase this. He comes to the table with something, then we could do something. So maybe we have another $40 or $30 personal money. We could look into this and something that we could talk about. This is okay. And if you come and bring like 30, 40,000 so maybe we can see that ship. So he'll not to do something that has to be us, but increase. Yeah.
This is lower than that. We're not even going. We're going to need to figure it out. We're going to do an assessment.
That's what he owns from the asset, and what's left over is what's actually owned by the business.
He knows that.
I guess the key is you need to bring some money together.
Two options. Either we wait and, let's generate a little more cash flow, or we can look at, look at some other options too. Because he probably said things out for that. People because one week. To be honest, I'm not assume, some people assassinate me assume, and they come there with $100,000, deposit. Okay, so how you doing today? This is time, that party finished. Before we sign. Trust me. Okay. So what we trying to do less, do more with less. Not tying up too much of his assets. We don't always do that.
Okay, we've only got 15 minutes to go, and it's a terribly difficult case, I think you agree. And you probably, in practice, you need a lot more time and thinking and possibly meetings with colleagues to come up with the discussion points. So, anyone like to start us off? I'm sure the gentleman at the back would be keen to start us off. Can you slide the mic down the table just a little bit so we can hear a bit more clearly?
Sure. So let's see. How would I respond to this client?
Second, I can't do it. But he hasn't got the long lead. Okay, you'll have to shout towards the mic if you would. Okay, so how are you going to start off? I'm Mr. Jordan coming in to see you. I hope you got my financial information. Sales have been going really well against the competitive market. I'm now up to $1.3 million of sales. And I've heard you guys are good financial planners. And I want to talk to you about potential investments. Yeah, Miguel, we're just saying about trying to get the mic nearer to the bottom of the table because he's going to present some views on this difficult case.
No problem.
Yeah.
Just pull it down a little bit. Testing 1, 2, testing.
Okay, yeah, I can hear you good.
Let's see, so from Mr. Clothing,
Yeah.
I would explain to him that his debts are a bit much.
So you're starting off.
Yes, I've reviewed his financial information, despite having...
Let's just imagine I'm Mr. Clothing to make this discussion easier, yeah?
Sorry?
He said he's going to be Mr. Clothing.
Okay. So yes.
I've come in to see, I want to talk to you, about investment plans. Our business is really well. I'm up to $1.3 million of sales now. Just bought a new BMW car last year. All the nice white surroundings, big speakers in the back. The driver and that's up, making plenty of noise. So what do you think? What advice are you going to give me then?
So the advice that I would give you, Mr. Clothing, I would see how we can work around our stock and see how we can better collect our debts in order to increase our cash flow. Because at this time we
well, just a minute. I mean, you're mentioning stock. Yes, I've got plenty of stock. I've got about $250,000 of stock in my warehouse. You want to come and have a look? Yeah.
No thanks.
So do you have any issues about my stock?
Yes, because it's costing you a lot more each year, and then we're not turning it over quickly enough.
Okay, yeah, well, I must admit that there are some items that are moving a bit slow. Yeah, I've got some stuff that's not really that fashionable, and probably the colours aren't quite right. You know, we bought a lot of sports shirts in for the England football team, you know, in the World Cup. As you know, they got knocked out in the semi-finals, so there's a lot of stuff there. Any ideas would be well received.
So we probably need a sale on those items to see how quickly we can move them to increase our cash flow.
Yeah, okay, now I like the sound of that, because I just heard you say the words increase the cash flow, because I have to be quite honest with you, I've had a lot of problems recently, you know, paying my suppliers. And, you know, I owe the suppliers over $200,000, and I just don't know how I can pay them, because I've increased my bank overdraft, and the bank won't go any further with that. So I really need some help in trying to, you know, shape up my business.
Okay. How is our collection practices in terms of our debts?
It's a specialty.
Well, that's the other problem we've got. We used to have this lady who was really good at the credit control side, but she left, and now I'm having to try and fit it in myself, and I'm not very good, you know, collecting the debts, because I like to just go out selling the clothes, you know. To driving around in my new car, I'm not really good at hassling people for money.
Okay, that can be a start. We can work on trying to collect our debts. That could definitely help our situation.
So would that help my cash flow then?
Yes, most definitely.
Okay.
Most definitely. That's one of the most important things, actually. Trying to sell our stock and then trying to collect our debts.
Okay, well that would be a good start. So do you think it's like a cash flow generated approach that you're suggesting?
Correct.
Because you know I'm good at selling. I'm up to $1.3 million. That was a 25% increase on sales last year.
Absolutely, which is pretty impressive.
So, yeah, I don't have any problem selling. It's, you know, just the other things that are going on.
Correct.
I don't really understand them, to be quite honest.
So for the vacancy, right?
Any of your colleagues who want to help out? I see you have a big financial planning team there. A lot of assistants, mainly ladies. They usually have good ideas.
Yeah, Mr. Clothing, I hope you're well today. I have a question for you.
Sure.
With your inventory, those numbers have gone up over the last several years. And I'm wondering if perhaps some of the inventory that you have, either number one, is it saleable? Also, if you were overstocked, can any of what you have be returned? And
no, because of the supplier contracts, it's not like, you know, when you get something from Amazon or somewhere, you can just sort of stick a return it back. It's not quite like that.
Okay. That's understandable. Maybe you know other competitors or people who are not nearby your shop who you can perhaps sell some of your inventory to in bulk. And
that might be quite a good idea. We could, because there's a big discount store nearby, so you're suggesting I try and offload quite a lot of my stuff?
Yes, because if you have stuff that's been sitting there for the last several months,
yeah,
you know, you can sell some of that, and that's cash, so you can buy more current stuff that you would have. And for your expansion you're talking about, I want to know, is this an expansion in terms of new areas? Like, do you sell to just males, females? Are you perhaps not wide enough, or maybe too wide? So you want to...
No, well, when I was mentioning investment plans, it wasn't like for the business expanding. It was really from a personal point of view. You know, I wanted to come up with some, you know, personal investment plans. But from what you're saying, I don't have the cash flow ability at the moment to even consider that.
I think we probably need to put the personal investment plans on hold for the time being.
Yes.
And let's just try and tighten up the company.
Yeah.
You know, because for example, we have issues with people paying us and us paying people.
Yeah.
So if we can get those numbers down, get those ratios, looking better, you'll find that overall it's going to affect the staff, affect their morale, and so, cash flow, cash flow, cash flow.
So this cash flow plan wouldn't, I mean, if I sell the stock at a knockdown value, wouldn't that make the cash flow worse?
No, because the inventory well, if you have things that haven't moved for a while, that you can sell.
I've got about $75,000 of stock I could think of immediately.
Well, that's not going to hurt you at all. That sounds positive to me.
Okay, so that sounds a good plan. And then the debtors, I need to get somebody in to help on the credit collection side.
Exactly.
Bring that woman
Make
back.
sure you have a proper aging report.
What report?
A aging report in terms of the people who owe you and the people who you owe,
Oh yes.
and in terms of your business reputation and stuff. And you don't want to run a reputational risk.
Right.
And tackle.
Well, you're right. I mean, at the moment I've got, a bit of an issue with the suppliers, and the relationship's not very good at the moment because, as you can see, I owe the suppliers a lot of money.
Okay.
So if I could find a way of reducing some of the suppliers' credit by generating something from the stock, say $75,000 quick stock movement, and collecting in some debtors, then I could get a bit of cash flow going. Is that the essence of your ideas?
Yeah.
One more smaller thing. The automobile.
Yeah.
We have to separate our professional life from our personal life.
Oh, well, that's a pity because I really like this white beard.
I understand that. We all do. But, the business has to function as a business, and you have to pay yourself a salary.
Yeah.
And treat yourself as an employee.
Okay, I'll take a look at that as well, because you've been very persuasive. Now look at all these lady assistants you've got there, and I haven't said anything yet. Do they agree with this approach, the cash flow approach?
Yeah.
Nobody disagrees.
Well, we've only got 5 minutes to go, but basically, yeah, that's really good because that's the thrust of this case when you think about it. So actually, if you look at the cash flow worksheet, just again for the final time, if we look at it, and if we were thinking of yet another column to the right there, if we were thinking about some type of projection, based on those two gentlemen's suggestions, what they're suggesting is that entry point, whether it's $13,000 or $34,000 or it's less than 13, isn't actually the critical issue at the moment, because even if that figure is very low as an entry point because he's trying to get the stock down, the main area of thrust is this working investment box, yeah? Can everybody see that? So what we're saying is, it doesn't matter too much if the profit figure is low coming in for our financial plan that we're talking about, because the main generators of cash flow would be the items that you've been discussing with me. For example, the stock. If we could turn the stock into a $75,000 positive position, instead of that $55,000 negative, $60,000 negative, so let's just put a figure there, say 75, and then if we can, by the help of this new credit control person, let's say, what do you think we could get the debtors down by? Let's look at the debtors in the balance sheet. See, the debtors have gone 150, 170, 230. So, and what about the debtor days? Because debtor days have gone 61, 59, 65. So there's quite a bit of scope there, as you pointed out, for debtor collection. But let's try and just put an estimate on it. What do you think we could get in terms of a dollar value there?
500,000. land rent. No.
Yeah, I've lost the sound now, sorry.
No, we're here.
Yeah, okay. Any ideas?
Even if you get it back to the year 2 number,
Yeah?
you know,
Year 2 number? What
That's
was year 2 number?
that'll be a start.
70. Well, that would be brilliant, wouldn't it? I mean, if we could get 60 in, but let's say that sounds a bit ambitious. I mean, if we went for 40, so we got 75 on the stock and 40 on the debtors, then what do we do about the suppliers? The suppliers are standing at 280 and they're screaming for something. So what could we pay the suppliers?
Pay them a little something.
At least 25% of that.
Yeah, okay. So what fee would that be? A quarter of 280, 70,000. Yeah, so can you see where I'm coming to? So in that section now, we've got 75,000 positive, we've got 40,000 positive from the debtors, and the suppliers are going to be delighted. Did you say 78,000?
And plus also the bank overdraft, we have to look at that as well because that
Yeah,
is...
we do, but that's further down. So let's
Right.
talk about the creditors, because the
Okay.
bank's secured, and they're not screaming at the moment, but the suppliers are. So what did you say we could pay the suppliers?
25%. So,
25%, let's try and get them down, you know, at least 25% of that sorted out.
Yeah, well, give me the figure then. What's a quarter of 280?
70,000.
70, thank you. So now we've got in that section 75,000 positive, 40,000 positive, and 70,000 negative that we're going to pay as supplies, correct? So the subtotal of those is 45,000 positive, so it's still positive.
Exactly.
Everybody got that?
Yes.
The 15.
Yeah. So what we're saying, and the key to this particular case at the moment, and very short term, because what he's facing actually is not an investment situation, he's actually facing a business cash flow crisis. Yeah? And you're turning this around, because if, for example, you only came in with 15 in line A, the same as you did last year, then to add to that, you've got the 45,000 change in work investment, but it's positive this time. So you've got 15 plus 45, you've got 60,000 to cover your interest expense, and moving further down, we're not going to plan any capital expenditure. So moving further down, picking up your point finally, is what about the debt? Well, we've got some scope, haven't we? We see that.
Yes.
So this time we're coming down with 60,000 of positive cash flow to cover the interest charge, no fixed asset expenditure allowed, a very small tax bill, and then we're at the bank part. Everybody see that? We're right down to the bottom. So this time line D would be positive, maybe around 30,000 because of your cash plan, and we've got scope to try and reduce the bank. Everybody okay with that?
Yes.
Now I know we've gone through that really rapidly, so you need to think it through a bit more, and of course to do these things in practice will be, maybe a bit more difficult than us saying, or collect your debtors in by this, reduce your stock by that. But at least we do have a good idea of what really needs to be done. So the next stage would be an urgent meeting, with the customer and with his accountant. Let's get this recovery plan in place, and it's cash flow driven, and good luck to the customer. Because what we have to say is there must be some merit in the business, because if you went back to year one, just for our final comments before we close, I mean, look at year one. You used to save 900,000, you had a gross profit of 90, he paid his interest, paid tax, and he had $17,000 left. So the business was in reasonable shape, wasn't it? In year one. So there must be something in there, that's worth our efforts to try and work with them as financial planners to try and help save this business. In year two, our lot went to $1 million. He's profit actually went down, so he sold more for less profit. And then year 3, of course, has been a complete disaster. And we have to stress that too. Year 3 is a disaster. Yes, you sold $1.3 million, but you hardly made any profit at all. You owe the suppliers money, you owe the bank more money, the stock looks stuck, and you're not collecting. But I wouldn't do it without, the accountants being present for the next meeting.
Okay.
Everybody okay with that?
Yes.
So I think that was a good session. We've got in really deep onto that case. Let's hope some of the first cases you look at aren't as tricky as that, and they're more straightforward. So that clothing case, quite tricky case. So thanks very much for attending, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Enjoy your day.
And have a good afternoon.
Okay, you too.
All the best to you. Bye for now.
Thanks.
Bye then.
So you have a good evening there.
Anything else want to say, Tom? You see this thing with the bank? That's gone from 90,000 to 138. The bank don't mind that.
No, they don't mind that.
As long
The
as you don't.
interest.
Exactly, and it's expensive money. That rate is probably 5% higher than any rate that he has because it's an overdraft.
Yeah,
facility.
you have overdrive.
Yeah.
Right,
That's
that's
because he didn't
So
know
why would you
himself.
reduce it? I know you mentioned reducing it.
I would, because the
interest will go down.
the interest cost is higher.
Yeah, once he
And
starts
because
selling.
what happens is that interest expense every month, that tax on,
Yeah.
that tax on. And like I say, as long as you're paying it, they don't mind.
Yeah.
But see, he going to the bank because he can't sell.
Yeah.
You gotta finance in other ways. Start selling, start paying off some of them debts with the bank. Start paying less in interest. All right, y'all, future financial planners. We'll see y'all Thursday.
Okay.
Y'all take care.
You too. Thank you so much.
Great afternoon. Thank you.
Cash flow. Cash flow is done. Okay, okay. Okay. They say at the end of the day, the cash flow worksheet is supposed to come back to the amount of cash you have on your statement. And that's your check. Okay? Okay. And as you go down, you see, at the end of the day, the number at the end of here should agree, because this in fact, the thing that this is your net movement in cash.
Zero?
Right, because you in your bank you have zero.
Good
Okay,
idea.
okay.
That's why it's your check, as long as it comes after this. To
So
this
right.
original.
Exactly, exactly. Because even the one that the guy did for you, where's his one?
Which guy?
The,
This one?
exactly. Statement of cash flows. But he did it another way, but his number should have come back to zero. 14.
But I remember
He-
now, we
he's
had to
zeroed
change some
down.
things up here.
Right, okay, but he's not, see, he's zeroed down to this point before these
Yes.
other things here, see? Okay, all right, so we come here, we say the profit before income and taxes, and that number we get right up here.
From the income statement.
Exactly,
So
okay?
you don't need two?
But we start.
Let's do it, yeah, yeah, because that's the first example, yeah.
So which number, which figure are you talking about?
The profit before interest and tax.
Yeah, you need your balance sheet out as well as your income statement and your cash flow statement. So you're probably gonna separate them.
And then, 34?
Exactly. What you may want even do,
What are they?
you may want to put one on there for 34. Mark it as one.
What do you mean?
Number one. Put number one next to it. Just put one.
Like
Or one in a circle.
Here?
Exactly.
Yeah, and then put it like as a reference to,
Mhm.
to where you're,
And then on the actual cash flow statement, put the same one there as well, so you'll know when you come back to
right
review
here.
it.
Oh, right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay? And then the other thing is other non-cash items. The other non-cash item they had on there, put 2,000.
You only just remain.
Okay, other non-cash, we had